And we welcome you back to Capitol Tonight. Well, the lawmakers we caught up with this evening are clearly relieved to be back home tonight, and it is also probably safe to say that the other 210 lawmakers are equally pleased. But perhaps no one in New York is happier to be able to spend this holiday weekend with their families and friends than the intrepid and war-weary members of the Capitol Press Corps. They were kind enough to spend some time with us before heading home to some well-deserved barbecues and whatever all else they're going to be doing. Rick Carlin and Jimmy Vilkin are political reporters for the Albany Times-Union. They both contribute to that paper's Capitol Confidential blog. Across the table is James T. Medore, Albany bureau chief for Newsday. And joining us from New York City tonight is Bob Hart, the political director from our sister station, New York One. Thanks for joining me, everyone.
Thank you. Happy 4th.
So, budget. Do we have one?
We don't have one. In fact, the budget is 93 days late today. And if you're keeping track of these things, in the last 25 years, there have only been 5 budgets that were later. And if they want to really break the record, which is 133 days, it occurred in George Pataki's administration in the 1990s, that's possible, because what we don't have is we don't have the Senate approving a revenue bill.
Right.
That's what's missing. Once that happens, then you have a budget.
Unlike the Pataki era, also, I don't think there was a $9 billion deficit at that time.
We had $11 billion once upon a time. Yeah, right in the
late
wake
in the
of
process,
2001.
though? Was it this late in the process?
I don't think so.
I think that's the difference. I mean, from what I've heard, when Pataki was holding up the budgets, they were in these veto battles. They were actually saving money to some extent. The money wasn't going out. When you're facing the deficit that we have now, the longer you wait, the harder it gets to close.
As David Patterson has told us.
And as he's mentioned,
yep.
and that's true. So there is a difference.
He said today that we have about a month before the budget falls out of whack, and there really has to be a substantive deadline. Of course, the problem is not necessarily fiscal at this point. It's completely political, and whether they can get the 32 votes needed to approve the revenue bill in the Senate. And, of course, the 2 holdouts are Senators Bill Stokowski of Lakeview near Buffalo and Brian Foley of Long Island.
Well, and actually maybe Antoine Thompson, too, in Buffalo. He's told us actually yesterday that he's not going to let Stokowski hang out there by himself. So that's 3. Wait, Bob, wait, hold on.
Who else might emerge?
Who knows? Anyone could emerge. Bob, what does it look like from your neck of the woods? We heard this morning from Mayor Bloomberg on his radio show, and he didn't do all that much slamming of the legislature. I was a little surprised by that.
I was surprised by it too, because it seems like a hobby for most politicians to whack the legislature like a giant piñata. The thing I think that some of this is about isn't really about SUNY control and CUNY control and the $1 billion contingency, the funds, the Medicaid, the FMAP money that everyone's been talking about. I think some of this is about next year and the legislature not wanting to create a precedent for possibly Governor Andrew Cuomo walking all over them next year, which is what Patterson was trying to do over the last 3 months. And I think really some of this, at least for the Assembly, Speaker Shelley Silver, on his mind, is the fact that he doesn't want to create a budget precedent for next year for Cuomo. And so I think that's part of the reason why this battle is as contentious as it has been.
Yeah, we actually saw Andrew Cuomo doing some weighing in this week, which I found really fascinating. He called 4 consecutive press conferences on completely unrelated topics. It was like mortgages, child pornography, something else.
And he sided very, very loudly with Patterson.
Yes, he did. Well, why not? I mean, they're not running against each other.
Why
so what's the problem?
Yeah.
So what did we think?
But it also sends a.
Go ahead, Bob. Finish it up.
It also sends a warning sign to the legislature. I think that this is what we could be seeing next year if there's a Cuomo administration.
Patterson, I think, is really doing some big favors for Cuomo, assuming that Cuomo becomes governor. He is setting this precedent. He's taking all the slings and arrows of fighting the legislature, and he seems to be showing them that the governor ultimately can prevail in these battles through his veto pen and through just holding out. And this year, the new twist is force-feeding these budget extenders also to the legislature.
In fact, some of the legislators I talked to earlier this week and even today said to me, if we think David Patterson's being hard on us, wait until Andrew Cuomo's the governor. He's going to slice and dice what's in the budget. We're going to have even deeper cuts. He's going to play more hardball with us. One man said to me, this is just the beginning of hell for us.
next year, the stimulus money's gone, right? And everyone knows he's got a 4-year term, Cuomo. You do the hard stuff first. You do the things that are going to anger people the most in that first year. So next year is going to be extremely interesting.
Bob?
You know, it kind of reminds me each week of like the old story of the frog in the pot of water where the heat is slowly raised until the frog doesn't know that's boiling to death. That's almost what happened with the legislature until this Monday when they put the brakes on everything. And I kind of wonder, why do they wait until now to do this? I mean, obviously each week they had to pass this legislation to keep the state fiscally afloat. But I kind of wonder, why didn't someone figure this out a few weeks ago until the very end? I mean,
to me, it's simple. Finally, Sheldon Silver was able to look at John Sampson and say, "You're going to do my budget. We're going to force it down your 32 members' throats, and that's how it's going to be. Otherwise, the governor rolls with us." That's why you hear the speaker being so insistent. We only make a deal once, is what he told us as he shut down the session and he walked away. And so, essentially, Sampson is finding that, maybe I cut a deal that I can't quite deliver on. And no surprise in the state Senate.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh about the Senate, but really. But I think that frog story, I kind of feel like Andrew Cuomo was telling it, or somebody was telling that frog story much on this program at some point, because you're not the first one to say it, Bob. It's so true. It just is such a truism. But in terms of the Senate, which I find amazing that now that you bring it up, it does not bode well. I mean, I think a lot of people are saying, okay, well, next year, if the Senate remains as closely divided as it is, which it looks like it very well could, regardless of who controls it, Republicans, Democrats, it really doesn't matter. What we have seen now is what everybody was asking for, rank and file empowerment.
Well, yeah,
and it's ugly.
They set the precedent right off the gate. Remember, Malcolm Smith was trying to wrest control, and he let these 4 guys essentially hold out and kind of roll him.
Negotiating with terrorists.
Right,
Who said that?
Yeah, it's negotiating with terrorists, negotiating with whoever has the bigger pack of Semtex stacked to their chest, and what's the holdout.
Terrible.
So it's funny and ironic that the first guy to get rolled was Bill Stokowski. He was supposed to be the chair of finance, and Carl Kruger and the Amigos basically made him the first casualty of the closely divided Senate. And now finally, after these 2 years, he's finally realized the trick. And as you said, Antoine Thompson and other people are realizing the trick, that they can get what they want, that they can essentially hamstring the entire conference for their own needs. It's the classic truism: if you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk. And this is why, most countries don't negotiate with terrorists.
At the same time, though, the idea that John Sampson has absolutely no leverage with Sheldon Silver at this moment is not correct, because the one piece of leverage John Sampson has is the revenue bill has not been adopted. Therefore, lawmakers are not being paid, and we saw last night outrage on the floor of the Assembly. People screaming, saying we want to go home and we want to be paid. And so there is some leverage. It's not as much as Sheldon Silver has. However, it's important to note that Sheldon Silver made a key statement yesterday. He clearly showed that he was willing to meet Sampson halfway on the Medicaid Reserve Fund. For the first time, he said, we have to be partners in government. I don't really think we should do this, but if the governor and John Sampson want to do it, I'll go along.
On the Medicaid thing you're talking about? I think, but actually the Speaker wants it to be done in a standalone. He doesn't want it to be done on a bill, on a separate bill that they all agree with three-way. And they're going to fight about who has the control of the money when and if it comes in, right? David Patterson wants to sock it away and dole it out in his way, and the legislature thinks that's crazy. But let me just ask you this, and I asked James because I know that you're probably the one who's going to be able to answer. What does it mean that the revenue bill hasn't passed? Megna said, the budget director, the whole is $7.5 billion and growing. Is that correct?
Actually, I talked to the comptroller's office yesterday about this.
Naturally,
and I beg to differ with Jimmy Vilkind for a moment. We're not going to have fiscal Armageddon immediately. In fact, what the comptroller's office says is most of the revenue we raise as a state comes from the personal income tax and corporate taxes and sales taxes, things that continue every single year and are not affected by this revenue bill. The real crunch is going to come in March, which is the end of the fiscal year, because whenever they pass this revenue bill, they're not going to raise the amount of money because there's less time to put these taxes into effect. The comptroller's office is telling me they really don't see a big problem until next year, into January, February, March. That's when we're going to see the real problem. Not right now, because